My name is Alder Yarrow. I'm a wine critic and wine writer. I've been running my own website since 2004 called Vinography.com. I've also been writing for Jancis Robinson, sometimes called the world's most respected wine critic, since 2012. I do a monthly column for her, and I write for various other magazines around the world. I spend most of my time tasting and writing about wine, but occasionally up here moderating really fun discussions like this one. I'm joined up here by three old-timers from the Anderson Valley. Immediately to my left is Pat Daniels, a longtime resident of the Valley, and what we might call a fixture in the Navarro Vineyards tasting room. And by fixture, we don't mean she hangs out and drinks all day, but she's behind the bar, educating, enlightening, welcoming, and hosting visitors for how many decades now? 43 years she's been at the Navarro Vineyards tasting room, watching the world come to Anderson Valley and find out what the wine's all about. Next to her, to the left, is Allan Green, founder of the Greenwood Ridge Winery, and also world-class canned wine collector, the owner of the largest collection of canned wine in the world. We won't be talking about that much today, but fascinating fact you can... Oh, we will? Okay, well, you can pin him down more about that at lunch. And then all the way to the left, John Scharffenberger, who you heard from this morning, founder of Scharffenberger Cellars, general bon vivant and sparkling wine guy. So, it's interesting. We got the beginning of a story this morning from you, John, around seeing a beautiful piece of property up on the ridge that you were not allowed to buy. And so, Allan, would you tell us the end of that story, which is how you ended up managing to buy it when they wouldn't sell it to John?
I haven't heard the John part.
Oh, yeah. Well, so he tried to buy that property.
Is this on?
Yeah.
Okay, well, Tony Hush showed the property to me in 1971. And we were my friends and I were gonna grow marijuana and start a winery. And he took it off the market. Once we came down with the deposit, he decided he didn't want to sell it. Anyway, you got it.
Maybe we didn't tell him we were going to grow pot there. Actually, I wasn't even along on the trip when my family bought that property. My brother talked them into it, and I know that he showed them the property before it was officially on the market. They made an offer after they saw that property and a few others, and then they went home, and apparently T.J. Nelson was the real estate agent, right? That was after me. Okay, well, T.J. Nelson was the real estate agent, and he saw my brother's red Volkswagen bus with the purple wheels where they stopped for dinner at the Owl Cafe and presented the counteroffer, and they bought it that same day. And that's the whole story that I know about that.
So, and then how did you end up there? You told me a little something about your personality as a teenager.
I didn't like people, I don't think, and so I could stay up there and I would go a month without seeing a person. So I guess when I was right out of college, I guess I liked that.
Yeah. John, what was it like in the beginning? You thought you were founding maybe a new commune in Anderson Valley?
Well, meanwhile, I was still at the university, and really, I really wanted to drop out and move up here, but I didn't. So I finished university, and then came up and ran what's now the Preston Ranch in Cloverdale. It's been since planted. I did all the vineyard layouts and stuff for that, and it's since been planted. And I worked at Stony Hill. I worked at Souverain for crushes, and then eventually my family bought an old cattle ranch in Talmadge. And so I moved there and planted 100 acres of grapes over the next 12 years. But it was during that period that I got really interested in making sparkling wine, and so that was all going on in the background. And eventually, I turned over the management of the vineyard to Casey Hartlip, and who's a really amazingly good vineyard manager. And I was able to, devote my time to making sparkling wine.
And how did you get into wine in general?
I was a grape grower.
Uh-huh.
My parents fed me wine when I was 12 and 14 and 18. I always considered wine, but I got a degree in agricultural geography, so my interest was in agriculture all along. I always wanted to manage agricultural things and farm, and I was lucky to be able to. But when I started, I had just gone to UC Davis and studied viticulture there. And I don't know, they're very famous for their enology, but their viticulture teaching was really abominable. UC Davis came up with the idea of planting AXR1, a $4 billion mistake, and pushed it on the California group. And we called their trellising systems the Davis Rot Tunnel. So anyway, they've since gotten better. And it was taught the viticulture back in it was 1971 or 72. It was like going to the Dodge Boys. They were really denigrating toward anybody, women and Mexican people, and it was a nightmare. But I'm really happy to see Davis move on and become good citizens. So it's great. Awesome. And now everything's been replanted to resistant rootstocks, and everybody forgets that the real problem was there. They were the ones. So anyway.
So you've got some wine in front of you, and there's nothing more annoying than listening to a whole bunch of people talk while you can't drink wine. So I encourage you to taste these wines as we're chatting up here quietly, because again, the room is really echoey. And make sure you save a little bit in each glass when we get to the point where we're going to actually talk about the individual wines. But it's kind of tough to just sit there staring at full glasses while we're up here chatting. So feel free to taste. Pat, talk a little bit about your start at the Navarro tasting room. I gather you were working in town and someone came and made you an offer you couldn't refuse.
Well, I was working at the Boonville Hotel. I had done that for a little while, and then the job came up at Navarro. I applied for it and was hired. And it was really a wonderful thing. I was able to just focus on that. And it was also helped me save some of my friends, because I was making homemade wine at the time. And they got tired of me bringing it to get-togethers. So I was able to get my friends back by taking them Navarro wine.
What was tasting room traffic like in 1980? Who was showing up and what were they doing? What were they asking about?
Well, there wasn't very many people. I remember one day I sold one bottle of Riesling. That was the whole day. And then I told you about the experience with, there was a drug scene going on in the valley at that time.
No.
I learned the hard way. I was by myself, and somebody came in. He was wearing a headscarf, which was dripping different colors down his face, and I was very suspicious, so I just tried to remain cool. He would come up and talk to me. He would go back. He would come back. He'd be a different personality. So finally, I just dealt with him as best as I could. He finally just said he had to go, and he left. But before he left, he came back in, and I wanted to know if I wanted some mushrooms. And I told him I was allergic, but thank him. So this same gentleman showed up about a month later. He was all cleaned up. He just came in to thank me for treating him so nicely. So that was a wonderful experience, a learning experience, I'll say.
A bastion of hospitality, the Navarro tasting room. Allan, tell us a little bit about the early days of getting this vineyard planted and farmed. I gather it wasn't always easy up there on the ridge.
Well, I do remember trying to do some planting. I mean, nowadays, if you want to plant a vineyard, You call a vineyard management company, and they come out with an experienced crew, some specialized equipment, and in 2 weeks it's done, and as long as you can write a huge check, it's fine. It wasn't like that in 1973 when we wanted to plant a couple acres. I knew nothing about what I was doing, and there weren't companies around here that you could call. Fortunately, all the wineries were very cooperative with each other. There were only 4 or 5 of us at that point. So Darren Edmeades lent me his 2 vineyard workers who did know how to plant grapes, and also his 2-man gas-powered auger to drill the holes. So I recruited 2 high school football players from the Anderson Valley High School to run the auger. And the planting crew was composed of ladies from the neighboring commune who did know how to plant things, not grapevines. So this was my crew. So first I tried to get the Edmeades Vineyards guys to explain to me in trying to use my high school Spanish how to plant grapevines. So then I could explain it to the ladies. And the guys with the auger were doing fine, except suddenly I looked up and they were gone and the auger was gone. So they came back 2 hours later, told me that they had to go sharpen it. Well, I knew that was bullshit, but they really went down to the valley to see if they could find somebody to buy beer for them. So as we got going, it got to be afternoon. The ladies from the commune decided that they wanted to work topless. So that was okay with me, but then the 2 Mexican guys were a little distracted, shall we say. They didn't get a lot done. The high school guys, the redneck guys, were too busy hassling the Mexican guys to even notice that the girls were topless. That was the commune that Winona Ryder grew up in. Unfortunately, she had left there by then. Anyway, so that took a lot more than a couple days to plant 2 acres of grapes. So that's what I remember about trying to get a vineyard planted.
John, what was the moment you realized that this was actually going to work? That making sparkling wine wasn't going to be your way of just becoming bankrupt?
I think it was probably, it took until it would probably be 88. John Fetzer invited me to come over to a lunch at his place. He had some French people coming to visit, and I brought our current Brut over there for lunch. And the people were from a company called BSN. It's now called Danone. The head of Danone, or the head of their beverages division, which included Pommery and Lanson, was there. And so I gave him some of my wine, and he said, "God, this is really good. Where do you make it?" And I told him where we made it. He came and looked at it later in the afternoon. He said, "You made that wine in this garage?" And he said, "Do you want to partner?" And that was when I realized I could sleep at night and not worry about the banks. So it was great. Good time.
And so just playing that out, these folks came on, invested in the operation, and eventually became sort of
we came up with a plan, and I planned the vineyards out, and we planned the winery. They had just rebuilt some of their wineries at Pommery and Lanson, so one of their guys came over and helped. Tex had been working for me for a couple of years, and he worked with their winemaker and designed the winery and put in a water treatment plant and everything you needed to do. And we finally started making good wines in the when was that? Early 90s. Yeah, they were delicious.
Nice. So I'm putting up now, Pat, some of the stuff that you found in your old nostalgia file. Are you in that photo there? The, in the skirt and the plaid top, and we've got some tasting notes from the vineyards for some of the earliest bottlings.
I wanted to bring one that showed just Mendocino. It just showed Mendocino before we could use Anderson Valley. So this was back in, before we were able to get that
Anybody
use
in
of
the room
that.
actually have tasted these wines? I know we got some older folks. Raise your hand if you might have tasted these couple wines that are shown on the screen. A few. Awesome. So Pat played a really important role in the creation of the Anderson Valley appellation itself, right? The creation of the petition and putting through all the research and stuff that went into granting Anderson Valley appellation status, as you said, getting away from just being Mendocino and being our own place. You want to tell us a little bit about that process?
Well, there was a lot of help, and a lot of people did a lot more than I did. But it happened pretty much, I could say, the first time that it came up of doing something to get together was after a charity tasting on the Mendocino coast. A couple of us stopped at the Albion River Inn. And by stopping there, we started talking about things that we could see that would benefit the vintners and the wine growers in the valley. And one of the things was to getting together more, sharing information, equipment if needed, and just that type of thing. And so that started. And it was, most of the things that happened were at hush at that time, because Hugo Oswald was he was one of the people involved from the beginning. And so we started getting together. The growers were very, very helpful. And one of the growers in particular, Pat Summers, did a lot of the extra work for us, putting together, being at the meetings, taking notes, getting things together. And I have all that paperwork of applying for the appellation, the things that we went through. But it was such an adventure. I loved every moment of learning about this valley, learning about all the different soils, the different climate from one end to the other. I mean, it was amazing. I just felt like we were in the middle of the world. Yeah. And I just love it. So.
And I think you were telling me earlier that you early on developed a strategy for getting everybody to show up to meetings.
Right, we started right away. We'd have potlucks, and we would have a lot of people like, one of my favorite gets-togethers was always at Handley Cellars, because the food was always good. I mean, it was potluck, but there was always be something there. And her father was a great collector. One of the things that I loved that he collected was wines from all over the world. She would bring out these wines that I could never afford to have them. It was just wonderful to be able to have all this sharing that went on at that time. And I think that sharing brought everybody even closer together. And so then that's when we decided that even though we loved being in Mendocino, they were just, completing up their appellation, we decided that the Anderson Valley was different and it was unique. And so we wanted to be sure that we were able to present that to people as well.
And I think one of the things that makes the valley unique too is that sense of community. Just the smallness of this place, the fact that it's out of the way, has over the years really created and fostered a sense of community, which I think Allan, both you and John really experienced in the early days of getting set up. Do either of you want to speak to that?
Well, what am I going to say about that? I was used to be like living on a ranch, a 2,000-acre ranch in the middle of nowhere, and when I moved over here, I lived on a paved road, and I had all kinds of friends from the wine world. So in those days, the wine people were kind of a quarter of the population, and it grew, and now it's basically more than probably 65% of the valley is involved in wine production. And it's we all have something in common, and we have something we have shared goals. So it's really wonderful to be here and to know so many people. and see them all the time. It's a great community.
Yeah, and there's a sense of collaboration, true. I mean, I travel all over the world to wine regions, all over of different sizes, and it's not true that everywhere where there's a wine community, neighbors, share tractors and lend each other, extra, stakes for the vineyard and things like that. But that seems to have been the case here for a while. Yeah.
Right.
Allan, do you have any stories of people helping you out in times of need?
Well, I have a lot of stories because I always needed something, but I never hesitated to call any of the other wineries if I needed something, and they were always happy to help. Hopefully, I was able to do that a little bit too. But in the early days, stuff got swapped around and even bought together.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Oh, people would go in and buy
Yeah.
shares in what, a tractor or?
I remember more like bottling equipment.
Uh-huh.
Because then you didn't need it at the same time.
Yeah. Yes, Chris?
Can I ask the question, when did the buildings, the two wineries get built? Because they're right next to each other for Greenwood Ridge and Navarro. When did they open?
Are you talking about the tasting rooms?
Tasting rooms, correct.
Well,
Navarro was first.
They're
opened-
very interesting right there. I mean, they're part of this landscape. And when did those come around to being built?
well, Navarro opened in Navarro opened in the spring of 1980,
Yeah, the Greenwood Ridge tasting room was completed in '86.
And the wood for the Navarro tasting room is one of its most striking features. Tell us about that.
Well, that was from a couple of old redwoods that had fallen on the hilltop. If you look over Navarro on the hill up there, the ridge, a couple of redwoods, I believe it was 3 redwoods, had fallen. And so they had those pulled out, taken and milled and brought back. So I always felt really cool thinking that they came back to home. So it was good.
Thanks for the question, Chris. You all should, if you do have questions, feel free to raise your hand and grab my attention. We can make this interactive as we go along. Very, very happy to have you part of the conversation. You told me a story when we spoke a couple weeks ago, Allan, about a shotgun.
I did.
That you needed to employ from time to time.
We had our first crop of grapes, not a very big crop. I think it was probably 1976. And I went away for the weekend and came back, and there was not a grape left. All the stems were there, but there were no grapes left. So apparently it had been foggy, and our caretakers had not noticed the huge flock of starlings that had descended on the vineyard and eaten every last grape. So from then on, we were very serious about what we called bird patrol, which meant being out there with shotguns for at least 4 or 5 shifts a day during harvest.
And you're not still doing that.
Can I take the 5th?
So no more modern ways of dealing with the birds. then.
Well, we tried things called bird bombs, which were sort of fireworks that you shoot out of a little pistol and like a cherry bomb that explodes. But those weren't any better than the shotguns, just a lot more expensive. And we also employed these speakers with computerized birds squawking distress signals. And I think maybe those helped a little bit, but the shotgun really felt like you were actually making some progress. And, of course, the wild turkeys, we didn't used to have wild turkeys. We used to have wild hogs. We don't seem to have them anymore, but now we've got turkeys. And, of course, no fence is going to keep them out either.
Yeah, and the turkeys will eat the berries.
Turkeys definitely eat the grapes.
Got it.
When the turkeys came in, those cherry bomb guns were really fun. I remember riding on my motorcycle and shooting them, into a Zinfandel vineyard over in Ukiah and watching the starlings fly. But, I don't think it was very effective. But, if you're like, 24 and you're on a motorcycle, it seemed like the right thing to do.
So let's talk a little bit about what's changed, right? We've come a long way in 40 years. Here's one measure of change, if I can get my thing to change. So here's a pie chart showing the planting of grapes and grape varieties in the valley between 1982 and 2018, and there's been a pretty significant shift, right? Whereas Pinot Noir was just 8% of the plantings in 82, it now makes up 69% of the plantings. Chardonnays stayed pretty constant, and Merlot, surprisingly, has stayed pretty constant as well. But what are some of the big changes that you've noticed besides the obvious explosion from, in the early days 4 or 5 wineries to now 40 in the valley?
Well, I think people are paying attention to the weather. I remember in a tasting group I was a member of when I was still over in Ukiah growing grapes. It was over here, and a lot of the people I knew were winemakers from here. And I remember Jed Steele complaining about it not being hot enough to make Cabernet. It was, they made some and it wasn't very good. And Syrah and things like that. So that began, I think, the thing. But, frankly, it was trial and error, and suddenly we all started making wines that tasted really good if they were Pinot Noir, and it just sort of took over. And the market has been very, very generous to us too. So I think Pinot Noir is really the king here.
Well, the obvious fact that instead of when I started there were 4 tasting rooms, and now, like you say, there's like 40. I mean, it just makes sales so much harder, right? And when I started, we used to have pretty much everybody that came through the valley would hit all 4 tasting rooms. Well, now it takes 10 trips through the valley to hit 4 tasting rooms, and by then there's 20 more. So we used to be able to sell, a lot of wine out of the tasting room, and it's a lot harder now. So I mean, that's a huge difference for all the wineries that are trying to start up.
And Pat, beyond the changing nature of headscarves on tourists that come and visit you, how do you measure the change that's happened? You see these faces every day coming through the tasting room over 40 years. That's probably shifted a lot.
Yeah, it has shifted a lot, but I think what makes me feel so sweet about the thing that I'm doing is I still see people who started coming in at the very beginning are still coming in, and they're so cute because they'll ask my advice, or they'll call and ask my advice, what should I get? But that type of thing. So there's still quite a few people, and then there's newer people that it's fun to educate because a lot of the younger people are not so much into wine. There's so many other options. And so it's just kind of fun to teach them about the valley just the whole thing, the food, the association, friends association, just all of that. Mm-hmm. It's good.
I think I remember you telling me about a particular group of German tourists that came along one year and made a pretty big impact on the winery.
This was very, very early on, and it was harvest time, and when they were in the area, and so Ted took them out into the vineyards, and they were just shocked because all of these grapes were laying on the ground. And they said, "What are you doing? You're getting rid of the best grapes." And Ted goes, "These are rotten grapes. I'm just having to thin them out so they don't affect everything else." And he goes, "These grapes are botryticized. They have a fungus called Botrytis cinerea." And Ted goes, "Oh, that's not possible. It doesn't happen in California." That's what he had been told. So for a couple of years, he had been dumping these grapes. And thank goodness these guys showed up. We made the next year, our first late harvest wine.
Which has become
And,
a mainstay of.
And, oh, they're absolutely wonderful. Now, yeah, we don't always get to make the total, what would be like in Germany, talking about an Auslese, but we do get to make the Spätlese and the Ausleses. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Germany. Let's talk a little bit about these wines that we have in front of us. John, you dug up some 2000 Brut. Really a nice treat to taste some older sparkling wine. Tell us what you remember about this wine and what you think about it now.
I completely forgot about this wine. It was made a long time ago, but when I taste it now, it's so fresh. It's sort of indicative of the style that we were making some years. I was always looking for a little bit more breadth and depth and middle palate, but Tex was really good at making really clean, crisp wines, and this wine has really held together pretty well. It doesn't have much autolytic component, but it really tastes good. This was made it was probably the last year we made wine over in Ukiah, so these weren't all whole cluster pressed. They were about half whole cluster pressed, so that's what I know. It just seems clean and clear, and I just want to finish my glass.
Would all of these grapes have come from Anderson Valley?
80%. I think we bought some from Nelson Vineyards over in Ukiah area up until this point. Mm-hmm. And then after that, we started it was all Anderson Valley. But the good thing about Valley Foothills Vineyard, it's the biggest vineyard in the valley now, and they were able to supply us with quite a bit of their grapes. So it was really great working with the family that owns it, and they're still good friends of mine.
Yeah. Chris? Yeah.
Just from the sparkling wine standpoint, Roeder comes in here, and it's a big deal. Did you work with Michel, and was there a good relationship there with him giving you ideas?
He didn't give me any ideas, but we were great friends. I mean, they were very collegial. We started a couple years before they did with Anderson Valley sparkling wine, and I was very jealous that they had built this big winery, and I was still making wine in a garage. But the nice thing is we were able to keep up, and the Roeder people were always very generous, and Michelle and Sylvie were great personal friends. So it remained that way until we moved away in different directions.
You had always sort of, I think, had a different stylistic ambition to Roeder. At least that was your impression, that you were making different types.
Roeder had different, their style was different. We used more malolactic fermentation. I was looking for a little bit more kind of mid-palate flavors, and never really achieved it until we went to all whole cluster pressing in 2002. That was the beginning of our wines being, really up to my, fulfilling my goals. Up till then, I was sort of struggling with not being able to afford the equipment I needed to do it. But after that, it was all Anderson Valley and all whole cluster.
Mm-hmm. What do you guys think about this wine? 20-year-old sparkling wine still tastes pretty darn good. I got some thumbs up coming from the middle rows there. How many of you regularly taste sparkling wines this old? Yeah, couple. Lucky people. Good for you.
Yeah, I wish I saved some of these things. I have a wine from 1976, and that's about it.
Yeah. It's. I think a lot of people think, oh, you go out and buy sparkling wine, you sort of got to drink it right away, but it ages beautifully, as this wine is showing. What would this wine have retailed for?
I think our retail prices were always around $15. So it depends, where and how we could sell it. We had to discount sometimes, but $15 was kind of our target.
Yeah.
And it's not much more than that now, but things have slowly crept up, which is good.
All right. What are we tasting from Greenwood, Allan?
This is a 06 Pinot, so this would be from grapes that we planted on Greenwood Ridge in '96. We'd been making Pinot for probably about 10 years. We'd been making Pinot from Roederer's grapes. It seemed like they always had one block that they couldn't quite get picked at the low sugars that they wanted. There always was a little bit that got away, and so we would get those more ripe Pinot grapes and made some really nice wines, but they told us that they weren't going to be able to sell any more grapes. They were going to start making still red wine too. So we planted our own in '96, and so these grapes would be about 10 years old from the ridge.
And you want to give us the basics of how you would have made this wine at the time?
Pretty much like we made all red wines. We'd ferment it in fermenters and press it later. We didn't do any whole cluster pressing or anything. Mm-hmm. The one thing is that this was the first year that we went to screw caps for all our wines. Mm-hmm. So that wine has been in a screw cap for 16 years.
It's showing pretty well.
I think so too.
Talk to us about that decision for screw caps.
Brad, save me. We planted a fair amount of the Roederer clone, the Dijon clone, and some of the small amount of a Wadensville clone, but mostly the Roederer and a Dijon clone. We had one vintage of really terrible TCA corks. That was the first thing. And then I took a trip to New Zealand and Australia and saw that they didn't have any issues with all their wines, red, white, expensive, cheap, in screw caps. So I thought, well, somebody's got to be first. So I guess that was us in Anderson Valley.
Yeah, but not a lot of people have followed you in that.
No, most people don't ever follow me.
And yeah, right? I mean, tastes, for the age of the wine, it's doing really well.
Oh, I think so too. And apparently in New Zealand, for many, many years before they all went to screw caps, when they wanted to see how a wine aged, they put it in screw caps.
Yeah.
Yeah, because then you really see what the wine's doing, not what some air is seeping in and doing to it. It's good. Corked wine's horrible, and sparkling wine is especially horrible because all those nasty chemicals go right into your sinuses. And I only wish there was some kind of screw cap equivalent for sparkling wine. I guess there's a pop top, but I don't think anybody's going to go for it. So there you go.
Well, all the young, hip, hipster wines these days are now under crown cap, right? Especially the pet nats, right? So maybe that's going to drive slowly more acceptance, and one day you can just move to crown caps. Not holding your breath, huh?
I could go back and afford it now. I could go back and do it. But when you're in the marketplace, and you're competing and you're trying to make it. It's pretty hard to be that innovative. It's hard to go against, the flow. And I think that, I joined I got into the chocolate world, and we came up with something that tasted so good. We were able to kind of buck the trends. And I think in the wine business, it's a lot harder. There's a lot more competition. In the wine business, there's 4,000 brands, competing for the peace of mind of 50 million people. And in the chocolate world, there was like 300 million, consumers going for 6 brands. So it's a lot easier to make headway there. Wine is especially difficult.
Yeah. Pat, tell us a little bit about, you give us the tasting room spiel on the 2016 Method Ancienne Pinot Noir. Maybe for those who don't know, what is the Method à l'Ancienne?
Well, the Method à l'Ancienne is the old-fashioned way of making wines. We don't have a lot of modern high-tech equipment. And so it's more in the old-fashioned way. We do we wear the gloves, but we do hand punch downs and that type of thing. And then it's just a lot of less machinery and more, hands and things like that, and checking all the time.
Yeah, and so that would have been the way that all the wines were made at Navarro at the beginning. Now it's just this one that gets this kind of special treatment?
We don't have any, we do have some more modern equipment, but we still do, with the reds, we use the big bins so that we do the punch down for however days it takes to get them, to the right level, and then they go from there into the other equipment. But we still call it the method ancienne because we do a couple of different styles of Pinot Noir.
Yeah, and this one has always been one of my favorites, and it's just incredibly age-worthy. It lasts for decades and decades, and unfortunately, people tend to just drink them up. We actually tried very, very hard to find older vintages of this, in collections and for sale elsewhere, and we just, for the life of us, we couldn't find enough older bottles, one or two here and there, which was not enough, obviously, to share with all of you. But if you get a chance, buying some of this wine and putting it away for a couple decades is a real treat. So this one we're tasting out of Magnum, I think.
Yeah, we were out of everything else. We had, in fact, the last 4 Magnums that we had came here today.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, cheers to that. Cheers to that. Folks, do you have questions either about these individual wines? Yes, Brad.
Going back to that slide about the distribution of varieties several slides ago, 1982, it cited 20% of the valley's grapes were Riesling.
That's what it says.
It's vineyard acreage.
Yeah.
Anybody have any comments, Al, John, about where that 20% of where'd they go? Might have been, you didn't have a secret place up there.
Secret Riesling plantings. Brad's asking, where did all that Riesling, where was it, and where did it
Valley
go?
Foothills had lots of Riesling, right?
Yeah, they have lots. Valley Foothill still has. Ordway, yeah. And I think they planted some new stuff over at Day Ranch. So they're maintaining their kind of commitment to Riesling, yeah.
Yeah. Yes, Bonnie. Yeah. Did everybody hear the question, or should I repeat it? Okay, some people are asking me to repeat it. So Bonnie's asking, there's a pretty dramatic shift towards a single grape between these two graphs. And what about this sort of all your eggs in one basket problem of going to a monoculture, a monovarietal? Does it make it that much harder to sell and to compete in the industry? And is there value perhaps in swinging a little bit farther back towards diversity, in trying to make the Anderson Valley, name sellable and products sellable in a competitive marketplace? Well, we do have a panel later this afternoon that's going to talk about the next 40 years, but there's, I think, some great perspective to be had from the three of you about that.
Well, I'm, kind of the pedestrian in this group, not really being in the industry anymore, but all I know is that climate change is upon us. And, we're going to find different fruit flavors coming out of our Pinot, and we're going to find different flavors coming out of other varieties. So, it's incremental, but it's you're right. It's got to change. It's not going to continue, and there's plenty of good things that can deal with our climate and make great wine.
I think you got to look at it separately from a grape grower's standpoint and a winery standpoint. I mean, the wineries like Navarro that does a lot of aromatic whites and other things other than Pinot, and they can do that and grow those grapes and come out ahead. But if you're looking at planting a vineyard and you can grow the same amount of Pinot Noir as you can grow Riesling and sell a Pinot Noir for 4 or 5 times as much, what are you going to plant? So until the marketplace changes, then the grape growers are sort of stuck.
Yeah, well, this is why nobody's planting Chenin Blanc in Napa, right? If you can plant Cabernet and get $8,000 a ton, you do that instead. So, but Navarro's particularly, loyal to the Alsatian grape varieties, to the Gewürztraminer, and it's built a brand around that. Do you still see that same kind of demand in the tasting room? Do people come in asking to taste and to buy the Gewürztraminer and the late harvest stuff?
Well, we have, that's a form of education, is to get people, one, to ask for the Gewürztraminer because they are embarrassed to ask.
Because they don't know how to pronounce the word?
They don't know how to pronounce it. The second thing is that they go back to the 80s, a lot of them, when Gallo and other big wineries were making these blends that they called Gewürztraminer or called Riesling, and they were these sweet wines. And those are the memories that people have in their head. So we have to educate them that no, we do a dessert wine, but we also do our Gewürztraminer and our Riesling in the French Alsatian style. And so we explain the process to people and get them, informed. And I think it's informing people is what helps. And so we do, a lot of people love our Gewürztraminer, and then, explaining what kind of foods it goes with, things like that. It's just education.
Mm-hmm. Chris?
Yeah, I'd just like to add a little comment to this, too. I give a lot of credit to Anderson Valley for doing the Alsace Festival, and it really was something that was very important here, and it makes me think a lot about Anderson Valley. When the appellation was granted in 1983, there were 500 acres of whites growing here, and there were I think it was 54, 56 acres of Pinot. Now there's over 2,000 acres of Pinot. That's a big difference. There's still about 500 acres of whites, but a lot of that white was the Chardonnay that was going into the sparkling wines. And so it's a very interesting thing that still to this day people come here for white wines too, because of what Navarro has done and what Greenwood Ridge did with the great Rieslings. And we don't really have much Riesling left in California, unfortunately. This is what I think of as far as the Riesling, Gewürztraminer, Alsatian style grapes that we have. We go to upstate New York, oh yeah, they've got stuff there. But this is to me, is a great place for it. The numbers are down, obviously Pinot sells, but what these people have done for us, I think, is a great thing for our society, and especially for us learning and the great food pairings that we can do that are, in some cases on par with the Mosel or Alsace. And it's just something that I hope never ends here. It's a very important thing to me as a sommelier and a writer for over 30 years. And I have a whole chapter on this appellation for my book on 1983. And this is a very important thing, and I see people still coming here for whites.
Here, absolutely. I think there was a question in the back, Damien.
Thanks, Alder. And the panel. I'm actually curious about the change to putting Pinot on the screw cap. To me, from my accent, I'm not from around here. I'm fairly familiar with that change. I'd be interested in the thoughts behind the concerns you had in changing over, or concerns anyone might have in changing over the screw cap, and indeed, were those concerns realised?
If you don't speak Australian, the The question was, what was it like making that change to screw caps, which Australians are very familiar with, but is much less familiar here in the States. And maybe what was some of the reaction of your customers, and yeah, talk a little bit about that.
Well, we did certainly have some customers who were more traditional, shall we say. But I basically said, okay, get with the program. I mean, if you insist on buying something with a cork, there's 7,000 other wineries that you can. But we sent out a lot of information in our newsletters supporting the plan and asking people to give it a try. And obviously, we didn't have any corked wines, so we had a better percentage of satisfied customers.
And was that, I mean, in theory, 100%, you knew that to be the case, but was that like anecdotally measurable? Like, did you get people returning bottles of wine or complaining on a regular basis, and did those complaints stop when you switched to screw caps?
You know, honestly, most of the corked wines were found by us in the tasting room or by me, which indicated to me that the customers didn't necessarily recognize that those wines were corked. They just thought those wines were crummy.
Yeah.
And that's the worst thing, is that the customer blames your wine and won't buy it anymore when it's the cork's fault.
Sure.
So we wanted to get away from that, and we never looked back.
Other questions out there? Do you guys have a favorite of these three wines? Oh, yeah, sure, Arno.
What were your recollection of harvest time back, in those days? Foggy, cool, you could take your time to pick, the ladies were topless. What were your
The question is memories of what harvest was like back in the old days, besides topless pickers.
I remember days on end in August that were, just 85 with a breeze, a coastal breeze that came in at 2 in the afternoon. And I just thought, what paradise this is, no hot weather. And our picking was usually, early September, mid-September. Never, after September, but now, it's a different story, I know.
Well, I know this is the Pinot Noir conference, but when we started, we didn't have Pinot Noir. We had Riesling, Merlot, and Cabernet, and we were picking Cabernet at Thanksgiving. So it was it was more worried about the rain and whether the grapes could get ripe before it rained. So it also occurred to me that our harvest was relatively cool. So we were harvesting grapes in cool weather, and I think that really helped the quality of the grapes and the acids. And in areas where it was warmer, they were harvesting those grapes in a lot warmer areas, and I think that was not beneficial.
Yeah, and that's changed now? Harvest is a lot warmer, yeah? Do you have any harvest memories, Pat?
My favorite harvest memories were, at the time, the rules were not so strict about employment. And so people would come up across the border, and they would work different vineyards, different agriculture stations up north to California, into Oregon, into Washington. And some of my very favorite memories were standing out on the deck and hearing people singing in the different voices from the cultures that they came from. That is, to me, so heartwarming. I'll never forget that.
All right. Yep, go ahead.
Just for John, what was with the Pacific Echo label?
A huge disaster.
Boy,
that had
wait,
nothing
now
to do
we're
with
getting into the really obscure trivia.
When I took an investment from the French company, I owned kind of a smidge of the company, and in 2004, maybe 1994 it was, they bought my shares out and which was nice. I didn't owe any money to anybody, but it wasn't a lot of money. But I had been working for myself. I had 40 employees. I was the boss. I kind of called the shots, and suddenly I had a boss from Veuve Clicquot who lived in New York, who's sort of famous woman, and she didn't like me at all. And so I just decided to resign, and so I did, and and she said, that Scharffenberger name is too ethnic, so she changed it to something that sounded like a dishwashing detergent. She thinks she's a really brilliant marketer, but the company, really after 2000, they did well, but then after that, the sales really dropped. Who would buy something called Pacific Echo? Luckily, Roederer came to the rescue and has done a wonderful job with the brand, and has continued to diversify and innovate with the Scharffenberger brand. And I think, our grapes have been helpful for Roederer's growth. And so Pacific Echo was, a big disaster. Yeah. So some French people, they're like 2% of French people are wonderful. Anyway, this woman was not in that 2%.
Oh my Lord! There's the quote of the conference right there. Any further questions? I think we're sort of getting to the end here. Yes, back there. So let me just repeat the question for those over here who might not have heard it. So beyond collecting, has Allan made any canned wine? And any thoughts on what's required to do decent canned wine?
Do you have that photo of the Anderson Valley canned wines that I sent you?
I don't believe we have that photo. I'm sorry. No,
you edited that one out? Thanks a lot. Is Randy from Handley? Are you here? Randy's not.
Oh, does that have at least the him against his collection? Let's see. There we go.
I was asking for Randy because Handley Cellars has canned 3 wines. Anderson Valley wines, a couple vintages of Chardonnay, a couple vintages of Pinot Gris, 3 vintages of Pinot Noir, that they can for maker wines in the Bay Area. So he would be much more expert in the technical. Nowadays there are portable canning lines like there are portable bottling lines. When I was making wine, there wasn't, and I tried to get the Anderson Valley Brewing Company to can a wine for me, but they weren't interested. I don't know why, but so I don't have any experience in that aspect. So call Randy at Handley because he does.
Yeah, and just as minor editorial, I tasted that wine when it first came out, and I was prompted to write an article entitled "The First Canned Wine That's Worth a Damn." You might beg to differ, given your collecting experiences far exceeds mine in terms of tasting canned wine. But for me, that was the very first canned wine that I thought, oh yeah, I'd drink more than one of these cans for sure. So kudos to Handley Cellars for doing that, and Lulu, I think in particular, was the instigator of that.
Well, it's the same thing as the screw caps. It's obviously non-traditional, and it requires a little bit of a leap of faith. But I'm obviously in favor of it. I've got over 3,100 different wine cans in my collection.
Which is a staggering number. I think I've probably ever seen maybe 100 in my life. So the idea that there are thousands is just mind-boggling.
They started canning wine in the 1930s.
Who knew? How many of you grew up drinking canned wine? Yeah, me neither. Okay, one last question if there is one. Otherwise, we will wrap up with thanks. I have no idea what's next. It might be lunch. Yeah. Okay.
And just a general housekeeping note, when you are getting up, please empty your glasses so that we can set up for the next tasting after lunch. And your chairs.
All right, thank you. Big hand for my panel here.